The high-pitched whir of quantum stabilizers filled the underground laboratory as Dr. Min Nungi adjusted her holographic interface. Suspended in midair, the three-dimensional model of timeline networks glowed with pulsating threads of light, each representing a distinct reality flowing through the multiverse. All except one, the 37th timeline, which flickered ominously with jagged disruptions. Anomaly detected in timeline 37. Probability fluctuation exceeding safety parameters, announced the artificial intelligence system. Min Nungi brushed a strand of hair from her face, dark eyes narrowing as she studied the erratic patterns. Run diagnostic sequence Alpha 9. Focus on temporal junction points. The year was 2147, and humanity had achieved what previous generations had considered impossible: the ability to observe parallel timelines. Not yet true time travel, but a revolutionary breakthrough nonetheless. The Deep Reality Institute, where Min Nungi worked, was at the forefront of this research, housed in a sprawling underground complex beneath Neo Hanoi. Diagnostic complete, the AI responded. Timeline 37 shows increasing destabilization. Reality oscillations detected at coordinates 457291. Min Nungi's fingers danced across the holographic controls, pulling up data streams and complex equations. Something about this anomaly defied their current theoretical framework. The 37th timeline shouldn't behave this way. It violated the fundamental continuity principles that governed all known realities. Send immediate notification to Senior Advisor Lemin, she instructed the AI. Mark as urgent. I need clearance to initiate deep probe protocols. While waiting for a response, she continued analyzing the data. The anomalies had started 3 weeks ago, subtle at first, barely noticeable among the regular quantum fluctuations. But they had grown exponentially, creating what her team called reality oscillations, moments when the present seemed to momentarily jump to alternative events before snapping back. Her communication panel chimed, but instead of Lemin's authorization, the message displayed a red security alert. Project Terminus activated. All timeline. 37 research suspended. Destroy all data immediately. Authorization. Highest level. Min Nungi stared at the message in disbelief. Project Terminus was the emergency protocol for irrecoverable timeline collapse, the nuclear option of temporal research. It meant sealing off access to a timeline permanently, essentially abandoning an entire reality strand. This makes no sense, she whispered to the empty lab. The instability is significant, but nowhere near Terminus criteria. She quickly encrypted her personal notes and the latest diagnostic data, transferring them to a secure quantum storage device the size of her thumbnail. Whatever was happening with Timeline 37, she couldn't simply erase it without understanding why. Too many questions remained unanswered. As she completed the transfer, the lab door hissed open. Senior Advisor Lemin entered, flanked by 2 security officers in the black uniforms of the Timeline Integrity Division. Dr. Ngi, Lemin said formally. The man who had once been her mentor now stood before her with cold authority. I assume you've received the directive? I have, she replied, maintaining her composure. But with all due respect, Advisor, this decision is premature. The anomalies deserve further study before... The decision is final, Lemin interrupted. The Institute Security Council has determined that continued access to Timeline 37 presents an unacceptable risk to timeline stability across the network. Min Nungi noticed the security officers positioning themselves on either side of her workstation. This wasn't just about following protocol. They were here to ensure compliance. Initiating data purge, she said reluctantly, entering the commands that would begin erasing all records of Timeline 37 from the Institute's databases. As the deletion progress bar advanced across her screen, she felt the weight of the quantum storage device in her lab coat pocket. A small act of defiance, but potentially a crucial one. Dr. Ngi, Lemin said, as the purge completed. You are to take mandatory leave for the next 7 days. Consider it a recuperation period. When you return, you'll be assigned to the Timeline 24 research team. She recognized the subtle threat beneath his words. The Timeline 24 team handled the most stable, predictable reality strand, essentially the scientific equivalent of being demoted to watching paint dry. "I understand," she said, gathering her personal belongings. The security officers watched her every move. As she left the laboratory, passing through the multiple security checkpoints of the Deep Reality Institute, Min-Yi's mind raced. The decision to terminate research into Timeline 37 had come too quickly, too decisively. Someone was afraid of what might be discovered there. Instead of taking the automated transport to her assigned living quarters, she made a detour to an older section of Neo-Hanoi. The streets narrowed here, twisted between buildings that predated the Great Reconstruction. Traditional Vietnamese architecture blended with modern elements, creating a cultural patchwork that had survived the turbulent decades of climate disasters and societal upheaval. She found the small cafe tucked away on a side street, its entrance partially hidden by hanging vines. The proprietor nodded to her. They had never exchanged words, but he recognized her as a regular. She took a seat in the far corner, ordered traditional cha pe sua ja, and waited. 15 minutes later, a man slid into the chair opposite her. Koa Tran's face showed the weariness of someone who hadn't slept in days, but his eyes remained sharp, observant. "You're taking a risk contacting me," he said quietly. "They're still monitoring former Institute employees." "They're monitoring current ones too," she replied. "But some risks are necessary." Koa had once been one of the Institute's leading researchers, specializing in temporal data encryption, until his public disagreement with the directors over ethical boundaries. His resignation 3 years ago had created ripples throughout the scientific community. "Something's happening with Timeline 37, Min-Yi continued, sliding her coffee aside to project a small hologram from her personal device. "Reality oscillations, exponential increases in quantum instability. And instead of investigating, the Institute has activated Project Terminus." Koa's expression darkened. "That's extreme. Terminus hasn't been used since the Timeline 8 collapse." "Exactly. Which makes me think they're hiding something." She deactivated the hologram and leaned forward. "I need your help, Koa. I saved some of the data before the purge, but I need someone who can decode the patterns without Institute resources." He studied her face for a long moment. "You know what you're asking. If they catch you interfering with the Terminus protocol, it's not just your career at stake. It's prison time." "I know," she said firmly. "But something about this feels wrong. Timeline 37 isn't just another reality strand. The anomalies I've been seeing, they're not random. There's a pattern, like the timeline is trying to communicate something." Koa's laugh was without humor. "Now you sound like the free reality movement." "I'm nothing like those extremists," she said sharply. "This is about scientific integrity, not ideology." "The line gets blurry sometimes," Koa replied, but then nodded slowly. "I still have some equipment in my workshop, not as advanced as Institute tech, but it might be enough to analyze your data. Meet me there tomorrow night." As they parted ways, Min-Yi felt both relief and apprehension. She was crossing a line that, once traversed, would forever change her path. But the mystery of Timeline 37 pulled at her consciousness like a gravitational force. That night, in her apartment, high above the glittering expanse of Neo-Hanoi, Min-Yi dreamed of fragmenting realities. In her dream, she stood at a crossroads where countless paths stretched before her, each one a different version of her life. And behind her, always just out of clear view, something followed, something that existed between the timelines rather than within them. She awoke with a start, heart pounding. On her nightstand, her personal device flashed with an urgent notification. An unregistered message, bypassing official channels. The text was simple. Timeline 37 breach detected at Memorial Plaza. 0600 hours. Come alone. Min Nungi checked the time. 5:23 a.m. Whoever sent the message wanted her to act immediately, giving her little time to consider the possibility of a trap. But if there truly was a breach, a term used when elements from one timeline manifested in another, it could provide crucial evidence. Dawn was breaking as she arrived at Memorial Plaza, a vast open space commemorating the Great Reconciliation of 2089. The early morning mist hung low over the reflective pools and stone monuments, with only a few maintenance drones hovering silently among the sculptures. She activated her sensory enhancement lenses, scanning for anything unusual, quantum disturbances, temporal disruptions, or simply someone watching her. The lenses detected nothing out of the ordinary, but as she approached the central monument, she felt it, a subtle wrongness in the air, like static electricity raising the hairs on her arms. Then she saw it, a shimmer in reality, no larger than a doorway, where the air seemed to fold in on itself. Within the distortion, fragmentary images flashed too quickly to comprehend. Faces, buildings, landscapes that shouldn't exist in this timeline. Min Hingyi approached cautiously, activating the recording function in her lenses. This was exactly what the Institute protocols warned against: direct interaction with temporal anomalies. But she needed evidence. As she drew closer, the distortion responded to her presence. The fragmentary images slowed, focusing on a single scene, a laboratory similar to her own, but with subtle differences. And standing before a holographic display was herself. Another version of Min Nungi, working frantically at controls while alarms flashed around her. The other Minyi looked up suddenly, as if sensing she was being watched. Their eyes met across the boundary between timelines, and in that moment, understanding passed between them without words. The other Minyi held up a data display showing complex equations, a message, a warning. Before she could fully comprehend what she was seeing, the distortion collapsed with a sound like thunder. The plaza's security systems immediately activated, sirens wailing as containment protocols engaged. Min Ungi fled before the authorities arrived, her mind racing to process what she had witnessed. That wasn't just any timeline breach. It was a deliberate communication from Timeline 37, from herself. By evening, Neo Hanoi buzzed with rumors about the Memorial Plaza incident. Official channels reported it as a minor power surge in the holographic memorial systems, but underground networks told of reality fractures and timeline crossings. In Koa's workshop, hidden in the industrial district beneath layers of electronic interference to shield from surveillance, Min Nungi replayed the recording from her lenses. "It's degraded," Koa said, enhancing the images as best he could with his equipment. Timeline crossover events create quantum interference that corrupts digital recording. But these equations, he pointed to the blurry images the other Min Nungi had shown. "I recognize this format. It's using the unified field theory, but with modifications I've never seen before." "Can you reconstruct it?" Min Nungi asked. "Parts of it. Give me time." Koa began working, fingers flying across holographic keyboards as he built mathematical models. While he worked, Min Nungi reviewed the data she had salvaged from the Institute. Something about the pattern of anomalies seemed familiar now, seen through the lens of what had happened at the plaza. The instabilities weren't random degradation. They were more like Morse code, pulses of disruption forming a pattern. "Koa," she said suddenly, "what if the anomalies aren't signs of a timeline collapsing, but of one trying to communicate?" He looked up from his work. "That would contradict everything we know about timeline dynamics. They're separate reality streams, not conscious entities. What if we're wrong? What if timelines have, I don't know, a kind of emergent intelligence? Or what if someone in Timeline 37 found a way to manipulate the quantum foundations to send messages across the divide? Koa was about to respond when his security system flashed a warning. "Someone's trying to bypass my outer perimeter," he said, pulling up surveillance feeds. Multiple individuals, using Institute-grade cloaking technology. Min-Ngi moved to his side, watching as the thermal imaging showed the heat signatures of at least 5 people surrounding the building. "How did they find us so quickly?" "They must have been tracking you since the plaza," Koa said grimly. "We need to move. There's a maintenance tunnel under the workshop. It connects to the old subway system." "What about your equipment, the data?" Koa grabbed a small device from his workbench. "Already transferred the essentials. The rest—" He activated a sequence on his central console. "The rest will be erased when the security protocols trigger. Better destroyed than in their hands." They had barely made it through the hidden access panel in the floor when they heard the workshop door being breached. Moving swiftly through the narrow maintenance tunnel, lit only by the dim glow of emergency lighting strips, they descended deeper into Neo-Hanoi's underground infrastructure. "Who were they?" Min-Ngi asked, as they paused at a junction to catch their breath. "Institute security?" "Not likely," Koa replied. "Institute agents would have announced themselves, tried to maintain the appearance of legality. These people came in silent, like they wanted to disappear us, not arrest us." A chill ran down Min-Ngi's spine. "Free reality? The extremists who believe timelines should be destroyed to purify the multiverse." "Possibly. Or another faction we don't know about yet. Whatever's happening with Timeline 37, it's drawn serious attention." They continued through the labyrinthine tunnels, eventually emerging in an abandoned section of the old city. The buildings here predated even the first wave of climate refugees, their structures reinforced against the rising seas that had never quite reached this elevation. "I have a safe house nearby," Koa said. "We can regroup there, analyze what we've salvaged." The safe house turned out to be a small apartment in a crumbling building. Its exterior deliberately maintained to look uninhabitable, while the interior had been renovated with modest but functional living spaces, and, more importantly, a sophisticated communications setup and data analysis station. "Welcome to my humble exile," Koa said with a hint of bitter humor. "Not quite Institute standards, but it serves its purpose." While Koa set up his equipment, Min-Ngi tried to process everything that had happened. In less than 24 hours, she had gone from respected Institute scientist to fugitive, pursued by unknown forces for glimpsing something she didn't yet understand. "I've reconstructed parts of the equation your doppelganger was showing," Koa announced after several hours of work. "It's brilliant, actually. They've taken the standard timeline theory and inverted one of the fundamental assumptions." "Which assumption?" Min-Ngi asked, moving to look over his shoulder. "The isolation principle. We've always believed that timelines function as separate, isolated systems that can observe, but never interact. This equation suggests that all timelines are actually interconnected at a quantum level, constantly exchanging information." Min-Ngi considered this. "If that's true, then the Institute's entire approach to timeline research is flawed. We've been treating them as distinct entities when they're actually parts of a unified system." "Exactly. And here's where it gets interesting." Koa highlighted a section of the equation. "According to this model, Timeline 37 isn't just another branch of reality. It's a nexus point, a timeline that intersects with multiple others at critical junctures." "A keystone timeline," Min-Ngi breathed. "If it collapses, it could destabilize the entire network." Koa finished her thought. "Which might explain why someone would want to activate Project Terminus. If they're afraid of contamination spreading from 37 to other timelines, sealing it off might seem like the safest option. Or," Min-Ngi said slowly, "if someone wanted to control access to a timeline that could potentially influence all others, ensuring they were the only ones with that access." Koa nodded grimly. power, control over the multiverse. Their theorizing was interrupted by an alert from Koa's security system. "We have another breach," he said, checking the feeds. "But this one's different. Single individual, approaching openly." On the screen, they watched as a woman in nondescript civilian clothing walked directly to the building's entrance, looked up at the surveillance camera, and waited. "Do you know her?" Mingi asked. "No," Koa replied. "But she clearly knows us, and she wants us to know she's here." After a moment's consideration, Koa activated the building's internal security measures, non-lethal, but enough to immobilize an intruder if necessary. "Let's see what she wants." When the woman entered the apartment, guided by Koa's remote instructions, her calm demeanor suggested she was either extremely confident or completely unconcerned by the potential danger. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, with features that hinted at Japanese ancestry, her posture suggesting military or security training. "Dr. Mingi, Koa Tran," she said, inclining her head slightly. "My name is Aiko Ishida. I represent interests that align with your current investigation." "What interests would those be?" Mingi asked cautiously. "Let's say parties concerned about the mismanagement of Timeline 37. Aiko reached slowly into her jacket, telegraphing her movements to avoid triggering any defensive reactions. She withdrew a small device and placed it on the table between them. "This contains additional data on the anomalies you've been tracking, including information about 6 other breach events similar to what you witnessed at Memorial Plaza." Koa made no move to touch the device. "Why bring this to us? And how did you find us?" "Finding you wasn't difficult. The free reality operatives who raided your workshop were being monitored. As for why," Aiko's expression remained neutral. "My employers believe you're the only ones who might be able to prevent a catastrophe. The Institute is compromised. Dr. Nee. What happened with Timeline 37 wasn't a security decision. It was sabotage." "Sabotage by whom?" Mingi demanded. "That's what we're trying to determine. But time is short. The reality oscillations are increasing in frequency and intensity. According to our models, we have less than 72 hours before Timeline 37 reaches critical instability." Mingi exchanged a glance with Koa. They had no reason to trust this woman, but if what she was saying was true— "What exactly do you want from us?" Mingi asked. "Your expertise, your insight, and access to the data you took from the Institute." Aiko nodded toward Mingi's pocket, where the quantum storage device remained. "In return, we offer resources, protection, and the chance to save not just Timeline 37, but potentially all connected realities." "And if we refuse?" Aiko shrugged slightly. "Then you continue alone, hunted by both the Institute and free reality, with limited equipment and data. Your choice, of course." After a tense discussion, Mingi and Koa cautiously agreed to work with Aiko, though they shared only selected portions of their data. Trust would have to be earned. Aiko took them to a hidden facility in what had once been an industrial complex, now repurposed with technology that rivaled the Institute's. A small team of researchers and security personnel worked there, all displaying the same professional detachment as Aiko herself. "Who exactly are you people?" Koa asked, as they were shown to a laboratory space. "Consider us independent observers," Aiko replied, "with a vested interest in timeline stability." Over the next day, they worked intensely, combining their data with what Aiko's team had collected. The picture that emerged was both fascinating and terrifying. Timeline 37 wasn't just experiencing random instabilities. It was being systematically attacked, targeted by precisely calculated quantum disruptions designed to fracture its cohesion. "These aren't natural phenomena," Mingi said, pointing to the pattern analysis. "These are deliberate incursions, like someone drilling holes in the fabric of reality." "But who would have both the knowledge and technology to do this?" Koa wondered. Even the Institute is years away from direct timeline manipulation at this level. Aiko, who had been silently observing their work, finally spoke. We believe it's the work of the Nexus Initiative. The what? Minnie looked up from the data displays. A group that splintered from the original timeline research program nearly 20 years ago. They developed theories about timeline exploitation that most scientists considered too dangerous to pursue. I've never heard of them, Koa said skeptically. You wouldn't have. Their existence was purged from official records after the schism, but they continued their work in secret, recruiting brilliant minds who shared their vision. Which is what exactly? Minnie asked. They believe that by creating controlled collapses in specific timelines, they can harvest the quantum energy released, energy that could be used to manipulate other timelines, essentially reshaping reality according to their design. The implications were staggering. And they've chosen Timeline 37 as their first target, Minnie said slowly, because of its Nexus properties. Precisely. Maximum impact for their initial demonstration. Once they prove it can be done. Aiko left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. As they continued their analysis, another pattern emerged, one that Minnie recognized from her own research, but had never fully understood. The reality oscillations weren't just increasing in frequency. They were concentrating around specific geographical locations. These are temporal junction points, she explained to the others. Places where the boundary between timelines is naturally thinner. The Institute mapped them years ago but could never fully explain their properties. And the largest concentration is right here in Neo-Hanoi, Koa noted, highlighting a pulsing cluster of anomalies centered on the city. Not just Neo-Hanoi, Minnie said, zooming in further. The Deep Reality Institute itself. The epicenter is directly beneath the main research facility. The realization struck them simultaneously. Whoever was attacking Timeline 37 was doing so from within the Institute. We need to get back in there, Minnie said decisively. Whatever device or technology they're using must be housed in the Institute's secure levels. Impossible, Koa countered. Security was tight when I worked there. Now, with Timeline 37 under Terminus protocols, it will be impenetrable. Not entirely, Aiko interjected. We've been monitoring Institute security protocols. There's a vulnerability in their quantum authentication system, a side effect of the reality oscillations themselves. The system occasionally experiences microsecond glitches, during which access restrictions temporarily default to standard parameters. You want to exploit quantum uncertainty to break into the most secure facility in Neo-Hanoi? Koa looked incredulous. The timing would have to be perfect. We'd have milliseconds at most. We've developed an algorithm to predict the glitches, Aiko replied. It's not perfect, but it gives us a window of opportunity. A small team could infiltrate during tonight's maintenance cycle, when staffing is minimal. Minnie considered the risks. Breaking into the Institute was treason, punishable by permanent consciousness digitization, a fate many considered worse than death. But if they were right about what was happening with Timeline 37, inaction would lead to catastrophe on an unimaginable scale. I'll go, she said firmly. I know the layout, the protocols, and my biometrics still have basic access to most areas. Not alone, Koa insisted. You'll need technical support to bypass the deeper security layers. I'll provide a security team, Aiko added, and emergency extraction if needed. As they prepared for the infiltration, Minnie couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The pieces fit together too neatly, the trail of evidence too clear. If the Nexus Initiative was as secretive and sophisticated as Aiko claimed, why leave such an obvious trace of their activities? But there was no time for further investigation. The next predicted security glitch would occur at 2:47 a.m., giving them less than 6 hours to prepare. The plan was relatively straightforward. Exploit the quantum authentication glitch to enter through a maintenance access point. Navigate to the deepest level of the Institute where the timeline network hub was located. Identify whatever device or technology was being used to attack Timeline 37 and neutralize it. Simple in theory, nearly impossible in execution. Under the cover of night, a small team assembled near the Institute's perimeter. Min Nungi and Koa wore the nondescript uniforms of maintenance personnel, while Aiko and two of her operatives provided armed escort, disguised as security contractors. Remember, Aiko briefed them one final time. We'll have exactly 4.3 seconds when the glitch occurs. After that, if you're not through the access point, the security system will reset and detect the intrusion. Min Nungi nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. Everything she had worked for, everything she believed in as a scientist, had led her to this moment of rebellion. But the evidence was irrefutable. Something malevolent was happening within the institution she had once revered. As they approached the maintenance access point, a seemingly ordinary service door set into the Institute's outer wall, Aiko's device began counting down to the predicted glitch. 10 seconds. 5, 3, 1. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the security panel flickered, its display momentarily scrambling before returning to normal. But in that brief interval, its status changed from secured to access granted. They moved swiftly, passing through the door and into the service tunnels that honeycomb the Institute's underground structure. Once inside, they separated as planned. Aiko and one operative would create a diversion in the upper levels if needed, while the other operative would secure their escape route. Min Nungi and Koa proceeded deeper, using service elevators and maintenance shafts to avoid the main corridors where security would be heaviest. Min Nungi's knowledge of the facility proved invaluable, guiding them through the labyrinthine structure toward the timeline network hub. "Security patrol ahead," Koa whispered, checking the scanner Aiko had provided. 2 guards. Standard rotation. They pressed themselves into a recessed utility alcove, waiting as the guards passed. Min Nungi held her breath, acutely aware that discovery now would mean not just her own imprisonment, but potentially the loss of their last chance to save Timeline 37. Once the patrol passed, they continued to the final security checkpoint before the hub, a biometric scanner that required top-level clearance. "This is where it gets complicated," Mingi murmured. "My access won't work here, glitch or no glitch." Koa removed a device from his pack, a sleek, handheld unit with multiple attachment points. "Quantum signature duplicator," he explained. "It can't create a full biometric profile, but it can amplify residual patterns from previous authorized users. The last person to use this scanner should have left enough of a quantum shadow for us to exploit." The device hummed softly as it analyzed the scanner, constructing a phantom biometric signature from microscopic traces left behind. After what seemed an eternity, the security door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. The timeline network hub stretched before them, a vast circular chamber dominated by the central projection array, a massive quantum computer dedicated to maintaining connections with all observed timelines. Normally, the chamber would be staffed by at least a dozen researchers and technicians, but under the Terminus protocols for Timeline 37, it was operating in automated mode. The only human presence, a single security officer stationed at the main console. "We need to disable him without triggering an alarm," Min Nungi whispered. "Already handled," came Koa's reply as he activated another device from his pack. A focused electromagnetic pulse, too weak to damage equipment but strong enough to temporarily disrupt the neural implants that all Institute security personnel wore. The guard slumped forward, unconscious but unharmed. They moved quickly to the central console. Min Nungi's fingers flew across the controls, navigating through the security protocols using her researcher access codes, supplemented by Koa's more invasive hacking methods when necessary. "There," she said finally, indicating a section of the control systems that shouldn't exist. "This entire subsystem is running independently from the main network. It's drawing massive power, but isn't listed in any of the official protocols. Can you access it? I'm trying, but it's using encryption I've never seen before. Min Ungi's frustration grew as each attempt to breach the subsystem was rebuffed. Whatever this is, it's beyond Institute technology. Let me try something, Koa said, connecting his own device to the console. If we can't break the encryption, maybe we can follow the power flow to its physical source. A three-dimensional schematic of the Institute appeared on their display, with a pulsing red line tracing the power consumption of the mysterious subsystem. It led to a section beneath the hub itself, an area that didn't appear on any official schematics. There's another level below us, Min-ngi realized, hidden from the main facility. They located a concealed access panel in the floor, disguised as part of the regular maintenance system. Beyond it lay a narrow spiral staircase descending into darkness. We should contact Aiko, Koa suggested. This is beyond what we planned for. No time, Min-ngi replied, already starting down the stairs. The next security sweep of the hub is in less than 15 minutes. We need to find whatever's down there and neutralize it now. The hidden chamber below was nothing like the sleek, ordered environment of the Institute above. This space was raw, improvised, with cables and conduits snaking across the floor and walls to converge on a central apparatus that pulsed with an unnatural light. The device itself defied easy description. Part quantum computer, part particle accelerator, with components Min Ungi had never seen before. At its heart, suspended in a containment field, writhed what looked like a tear in the fabric of reality itself. A jagged, shifting opening that revealed glimpses of another place, another time. It's a direct breach into Timeline 37, she breathed, awestruck despite the horror of what she was witnessing. They've actually created a stable portal. Not stable, Koa corrected, checking readings on a nearby console. It's deteriorating the quantum boundaries between timelines. Each pulse weakens the structure further. Min Ungi moved closer to examine the controls. We need to shut it down. If we can reverse the quantum flow, it might repair some of the damage before... Before what? Dr. Ngi? Came a voice from behind them. Before you interfere with years of careful work? They turned to find Rahim al-Sahir standing at the foot of the stairs. The leader of Free Reality was a tall, imposing figure with intense eyes that seemed to burn with inner conviction. Behind him stood several armed followers, their weapons trained on Min-ngi and Koa. Rahim, Min-ngi said, surprised. You're behind this? I thought Free Reality wanted to destroy timelines, not exploit them. A necessary public position, Rahim replied smoothly. The truth is always more complex, isn't it? Free Reality is merely the visible face of a much older, more significant movement. The Nexus Initiative, Koa said, understanding dawning. Very good. Mr. Tran. Yes. The initiative has existed since the earliest days of timeline research. We understood from the beginning what others refused to see, that timelines aren't separate realities to be observed and catalogued. They're resources to be harnessed. Resources? Min-ngi's disgust was evident. You're tearing apart an entire reality, potentially destabilizing all connected timelines. A temporary disruption for a permanent solution, Rahim countered. Timeline 37 is unique. It exists at the intersection of multiple reality strands. By creating controlled collapse points within it, we can establish permanent conduits between all timelines. Imagine it, Dr. Ngi, unlimited access to every possible reality. The power to select the best elements from each, to craft a perfect existence. At the cost of countless lives in Timeline 37, Min-ngi shot back. Billions of conscious beings erased for your perfect existence. Rahim's expression hardened. Theoretical lives, potential lives, abstract mathematical possibilities compared to concrete reality. They're just as real as we are, Min-ngi insisted. I've seen them. I've seen myself in that timeline. Ah, yes. Your encounter at Memorial Plaza. An unfortunate leak in our containment systems, but ultimately irrelevant. The process has progressed too far to be stopped now. As if to emphasize his point, the portal pulsed violently, sending a shockwave through the chamber that staggered everyone present. The tear in reality widened momentarily, and through it, Min Ungi glimpsed scenes of devastation, buildings collapsing, the sky torn with fracture lines like broken glass. "You're killing them," she whispered. "I'm saving everyone else," Rahim replied, an edge of desperation entering his voice for the first time. "Do you think I made this decision lightly? I've seen what happens when timelines collapse naturally, without control or purpose. My family—" He stopped, composing himself. "In my original timeline, before I came to this one, I watched reality itself unravel. Everyone I loved erased not just from existence, but from ever having existed at all. This way, at least their sacrifice serves a greater purpose." "This isn't the answer," Koa said. "There are other approaches to timeline stability that don't require destruction." "We're beyond theoretical debates," Rahim said dismissively. "The cascade has begun. In less than an hour, Timeline 37 will reach its breaking point, and the new network will form." "Unless we stop it," came Aiko's voice from the stairway. She stood with her two operatives, weapons drawn. "Step away from the controls, Rahim." The standoff was immediate and tense, with both groups aiming weapons at each other, while Min Ungi and Koa remained caught in the middle, near the portal device. "Aiko Ishida," Rahim said, seemingly unsurprised. "Still fighting for the preservation of your own timeline. I see. How noble." "This isn't just about my timeline," Aiko replied coldly. "What you're doing threatens the entire multiversal structure. The equations are clear. A forced collapse of a nexus timeline will create a cascade effect that no reality can contain." Ming-Ni looked between them, realizing the fuller picture. "You're not from this timeline either," she said to Aiko. "You're from—" "Timeline 37, Aiko confirmed. "Or rather, a branch of it. I was sent to prevent exactly this scenario." The revelation came as both shock and validation. Min-Ni had been right. Timeline 37 wasn't just some abstract mathematical construct. It was a living reality with its own history, its own people fighting for survival. While the armed standoff continued, Min-Ni turned her attention back to the portal device. If she couldn't shut it down conventionally, perhaps there was another approach. "Koa," she whispered, "the quantum stabilization protocols. If we invert them—" He caught her meaning immediately. It could seal the breach from both sides. But Min-Ni, that would mean cutting off Timeline 37 completely. No further contact, no observation, nothing. "Better isolated than destroyed," she replied grimly. As the tension between Rahim's forces and Aiko's team erupted into open conflict, with energy weapons discharging in the confined space, Min Ungi and Koa worked frantically at the portal controls. The fighting provided cover for their actions, with neither side realizing what they were attempting until it was too late. "Quantum inversion initiating," Min Ungi announced as she input the final command sequence. "Timeline 37 will be sealed in a protective isolation field, cutting it off from all external influences, including this attack." "No!" Rahim lunged toward them, breaking away from the firefight. "You don't understand what you're doing. The portal is the only thing keeping Timeline 37 stable now. Close it, and the timeline will collapse on its own." "He's lying," Aiko called out, engaged in combat with one of Rahim's lieutenants. "The timeline was stable before they started drilling into it." Min-Ungi hesitated, her finger hovering over the final activation control. What if Rahim was right? What if their attempt to save Timeline 37 would actually ensure its destruction? In that moment of doubt, the portal pulsed again, more violently than before. The containment field fluctuated, and suddenly, the tear in reality expanded, enveloping Min-Ungi in its glow. She found herself simultaneously in two places: the hidden chamber beneath the Institute, and a devastated laboratory in Timeline 37, where another version of herself worked desperately to stabilize her side of reality. Their eyes met across the quantum divide, and in that moment, Min Nungi understood. The other her nodded once, determinedly, and mouthed a single word: now. Min Ngi pressed the activation control. The quantum inversion process was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The portal didn't simply close, it inverted, turning inside out as the quantum boundaries between timelines reasserted themselves. The process released a massive surge of energy that overloaded systems throughout the Institute, plunging the facility into darkness as emergency protocols engaged. When emergency power activated moments later, the hidden chamber was in chaos. The portal device had imploded, leaving a scorched crater where it had stood. Rahim and several of his followers lay unconscious, thrown back by the energy release. Aiko and one of her operatives remained standing, though clearly injured. "Did it work?" Minningi asked, pulling herself to her feet. "Is Timeline 37 safe?" Aiko checked a device on her wrist, then nodded slowly. "The breach is sealed. Timeline 37 has been placed in quantum isolation. No further incursions possible. It will take time to heal, but it should survive." "And you?" Koa asked. "If you're from that timeline—" "I can never return," Aiko said simply. "A sacrifice I was prepared to make when I accepted this mission." The moment of relief was short-lived. Institute security alerts blared throughout the facility, and the sounds of approaching forces echoed down the stairwell. "You need to go," Aiko said urgently. "My operative has secured an escape route through the maintenance tunnels. We'll hold them here as long as possible." "What about you?" Mingi asked. "My mission was to save Timeline 37. That's done. Now I'll make sure Rahim and his people face justice for what they've done." There was no time for further discussion. Mingi and Koa followed Aiko's remaining operative through a hidden access panel, escaping into the maintenance system just as Institute security forces stormed the chamber. Their escape from the Institute was a blur of narrow corridors, security checkpoints bypassed with increasingly desperate measures, and finally, a breathless emergence into the pre-dawn streets of Neo-Hanoi. They separated from Aiko's operative, who disappeared into the shadows with a silent nod of farewell. By morning, the official story dominated all news channels: a terrorist attack on the Deep Reality Institute by free reality extremists, thwarted by security forces, dozens arrested, including the organization's leadership. No mention of Timeline 37, the hidden portal, or the true nature of what had occurred. Minhungi and Koa went into hiding, moving between safe houses and anonymous accommodations, always one step ahead of the authorities. Their names and faces were now associated with the attack, branded as collaborators with free reality. 6 months passed. The initial manhunt gradually lost intensity as other crises demanded attention. The Timeline network had been severely damaged in the attack, with multiple monitored realities now inaccessible. The Institute announced a restructuring, with senior advisor Lamin promoted to director of operations. Min Ngi, now living under an assumed identity in a remote community on the Vietnamese coast, received an unexpected message through channels Koa had established for emergencies. "Found something. Come immediately." The coordinates led to an abandoned research outpost in the mountains, one of many satellite facilities the Institute had maintained before consolidating operations in Neo-Hanoi. Koa was waiting for her there, his expression a mixture of excitement and concern. "I've been monitoring quantum fluctuations across the region," he explained, leading her to a makeshift laboratory he had assembled from salvaged equipment. "Looking for any sign that Timeline 37 might be recovering. 3 days ago, I detected this." On his display appeared a familiar pattern, the distinctive quantum signature of Timeline 37, but fragmented, incomplete. "It's still there," Minhee breathed. The isolation protocol worked. Partially, Koa cautioned. The timeline is stabilizing, but it's changed. The trauma it experienced has altered its fundamental structure. It's becoming something new. New how? That's what I've been trying to determine. The quantum signature suggests a hybridization process, as if Timeline 37 is incorporating elements from other realities it contacted during the breach events. Min Nungi studied the data, her scientific curiosity overriding the caution that had become second nature during months of hiding. It's adapting, evolving in response to the attack. There's more, Koa said, adjusting the display. I've detected localized quantum phenomena at 7 locations around the world. Small breaches. Nothing like the portal Rahim created, but definite weakening of the barriers between our timeline and 37. Natural breaches or deliberate? That's the question. They're too organized to be entirely natural, but they lack the destructive signature of Rahim's technology. It's almost as if Timeline 37 is reaching out. Min-Ngi finished his thought, creating its own controlled connection points. The implications were staggering. If a timeline could develop this level of self-preservation, of intentional interaction with other realities, it would revolutionize their entire understanding of the multiverse. What do we do? Koa asked. Min-Ngi considered their options. They remained fugitives, their access to resources severely limited. The Institute, now under Lamin's leadership, would never accept their findings, might even see them as a threat to the new narrative they had constructed. We observe, she decided. We document everything, and we prepare. Prepare for what? Min-Ngi's gaze returned to the quantum signature of Timeline 37, its patterns now pulsing with a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate, like a heartbeat, like a message. For whatever comes next, she said softly. Timeline 37 survived. Koa, it adapted. And now, I think it's awakening. In a secure holding facility beneath the restructured Deep Reality Institute, Rahim al-Sahir sat in contemplative silence. His cell was comfortable but inescapable, designed specifically to hold someone with his unique knowledge of quantum mechanics and timeline dynamics. Director Lamin observed him through one-way quantum glass, his expression unreadable. Beside him stood a figure in the shadows, features obscured. He still refuses to cooperate? The shadowed figure asked. He speaks only of failure and lost opportunities, Lamin replied. But the data we recovered from the destroyed device has proven invaluable. The Council is pleased with your progress. Director, the setback with Timeline 37 was unfortunate, but temporary. There are other nexus points, other opportunities. And Dr. Ngi Tran? Still at large, but of limited concern. Without resources or allies, what can they do but hide? In his cell, unaware of being observed, Rahim traced equations on the wall with his finger, invisible calculations that only he could see, and smiled, very slightly. Far from Neo Hanoi, in the abandoned research outpost that had become their sanctuary, Min Nungi woke from a dream of fracturing realities. But this time, the dream hadn't brought fear. It had brought clarity. On the monitoring equipment beside her bed, a small anomaly registered. A quantum fluctuation, too brief to trigger alarms, but distinctive in its pattern. For a moment, just a microsecond, the barrier between timelines had thinned enough for something to pass through. Not matter or energy, but information. On her display appeared a single line of code, in a format she recognized immediately as her own preferred notation style. The 37th isn't breaking, it's becoming. Prepare for the crossing. The message vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving no trace in the system logs. But Min-Ngi knew what she had seen, knew who had sent it. Across the quantum divide, across the barrier between realities, she had made contact with herself. Timeline 37 wasn't finished. Its story, their story, was just beginning. In the heart of what had once been the Timeline Network Hub, now rebuilt and repurposed under Lamin's direction, a new device took shape, smaller than Rahim's creation, more elegant in its design, but with the same fundamental purpose: to breach the walls between realities. And deep within its quantum core, a small anomaly formed, a flaw in its foundation that would, when activated, create a very specific kind of instability, the kind that would open not to Timeline 37 as it had been, but to what it was becoming. The kind of flaw that could only have been introduced by someone with intimate knowledge of both the technology and its purpose. Someone working quietly from within the system, playing a longer game. In her mountain hideaway, Min Ungi continued her work, documenting the increasing frequency of quantum fluctuations, preparing for a future she couldn't fully envision but knew was approaching. A future where the boundaries between timelines might become more suggestion than law, where reality itself might prove more fluid, more alive than anyone had dared imagine. The 37th timeline wasn't just a branch of possibility or a parallel world. It was becoming something new, a bridge, a nexus, a breaking point for old limitations. And whatever emerged from its transformation would change everything. Again,